So, okay, good. Well, I'm glad the meeting is being recorded. So, when I taught the last class that I taught on dealing with death and one's own mortality, we talk a lot about fear and just the fear of dying, the fear of leaving loved ones behind, and how a lot of dealing with your own mortality is coming to terms with it and releasing a lot of that fear and facing it with equanimity. So when I was looking around for ideas for what to teach this season at Temple Shalom, I went to Barnes and Noble at home in Ohio over the summer, and I came across a book that really piqued my interest. Um, it's called "What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid? Discover a life filled with purpose and joy through the secrets of Jewish wisdom." And I thought, well, that sounds very interesting. And I don't know if you can see the book. It's by an Israeli named Michelle Oshman. And what intrigued me the most was that this book wasn't written by a rabbi or a Talmudic scholar. This is an Israeli woman who was successful in business, and she found the secrets of Jewish wisdom to find joy and meaning in her life. And so I picked up the book and I started looking through it, and lo and behold, in the first few pages, what does she admit to but a lifelong struggle with anxiety? So I thought, boy, this just seems to be the pervasive theme of 2021. In addition to the pandemic, you have so many people coming out to admit these struggles with stress and anxiety. So I bought the book, and I love the way that it was divided into 10 Jewish concepts that can help us deal with anxiety. So I'm not a professional counselor. This is not a therapy session, but we're going to look at dealing with anxiety from a spiritual perspective, and not so much directly, but in other words, as an indirect result of looking for purpose, meaning, and joy in your life. I think a byproduct of that will be an amelioration, possibly even an elimination of one's anxiety. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to see how Jewish concepts and values can help us in our everyday life. You know, so often we look at our connection to Judaism as being something that we're doing to preserve our parents' heritage, or something we want to pass down to future generations, or we think about Jewish survival and how important that is. But we don't always look at our religion as to how it can help us get through a day. And that's something I've always been looking at and concerned with throughout my rabbinate is, what does our religion have to offer us that can help us, not just on Shabbat and holidays, but what about Sunday through Thursday? How can Judaism help us get through the day? What does our faith have to teach us about inner peace of mind? In church parlance, it used to be, if it ain't good on Monday, it ain't good on Sunday. So something like that. And I think that's, we often miss, how Judaism can help us in our adult life. And a lot of us are we focus on passing it on to the children and how important it is for kids, but we sometimes fail to ask, what can our faith do for us? Well, that's what this class is all about. All right. So I want to go through some of the points made by the author. And her first point is that the source of anxiety is fear, things that we are afraid of. As I said, the author, Michal Oshman, was extremely successful as a business executive and senior leader at top banks, advertising, PR, and tech companies, including Facebook. And on the cover of the book, it says, head of culture, TikTok Europe, and former leadership expert, Facebook. So I thought this is someone a lot of us can relate to. having been in careers in business or technology or medicine or whatever it is that we do. She's not a religious leader. She's not a religious person necessarily. She's just someone like yourselves who had a normal career and found something special in Judaism. She exuded self-confidence. She was looked up to in the business world. She was well respected as an authority in her field. She was a high achiever, but it was all just a facade. For lurking deep within her psyche was a pervasive, crippling sense of fear and anxiety. Let me read you a little excerpt just to, let you sort of understand where she's coming from. For as long as I could remember, I had been suffering from anxiety, the kind that permeates every aspect of your life and consumes every waking thought. This anxiety meant that my mind would naturally drift to the worst case scenario in any situation. If my friend texted to let me know she was on her way to my house, I would imagine her having a car crash on the way. I would never suggest a time to meet, because then I would be complicit in her death. Each time one of my children asked me to sign a permission slip for a school trip or a day at the museum, it felt like I was signing their death sentence. As anyone suffering from anxiety can attest, these imaginary scenarios can have very real effects on the mind and body. Those intrusive thoughts would send waves of heat coursing through my entire body. I'd become short of breath, all because of fear. Fear that my children would get lost, forgotten, or kidnapped at the museum. That's how immediate negative outcomes were to me. They would flash into my head, then I would ruminate on them again and again, imagining them vividly until in my mind and body they became reality. And this reminded me of a couple of things. Rabbi Leader in his sermon said he always imagined the worst case scenarios in every situation. And it brought back memories of me when I was young. I was about 10 or 11, and for some reason I developed this pervasive anxiety that when my mother went to work in downtown San Francisco, that she wouldn't come home, that she'd be in a car crash or she'd fall into harm's way. And I was literally paralyzed with anxiety that she wouldn't come home. And this went on for a good couple of years. I had completely forgotten about it until I read the account from the author. So I think this is something we can all relate to. We've all felt anxiety, irrational anxiety in our lives. Okay. Now, our author had good reason to have anxiety. Her father was Israel's top forensic pathologist who dealt with death on a daily basis, to which she was exposed as a child. Moreover, her grandparents on both sides were Holocaust survivors whose firsthand experience of genocide left them permanently traumatized. To this add the constant threat of terror attacks in Israel. Mix it all together and you have an overwhelming, pervasive recipe for deep-rooted anxiety. And again, and I'm going to read you a few excerpts, from the book, because I think that's important. After going to therapy for many years, things had actually gotten worse, not better. But although I declared to myself that I was ready to give up on living a joyful life, deep inside me, I knew there was something else, something bigger than my anxiety, a hidden spark of joy that I just couldn't get to. I didn't know what the spark I felt inside was or how to reach it, but I believed it was there. You know what? That is the wrong page. We got ahead of ourselves. Sorry. So when I saw that question, what would you do if you weren't afraid, on the wall at Facebook, I felt deeply moved. Throughout my life, anxiety had taken away the simple joys of life. It had stopped me from having joyful, intimate relationships, from enjoying my job, from feeling good about myself. It had made me hide aspects of my personality and feel guilty and worried when I should have been content. The suggestion that I didn't have to live my life in a constant state of anxiety was almost inconceivable, and yet here it was. So, yeah, sorry about that. The first page I read was the next reading. Now, Now, and of course, she is not alone in her suffering. Some statistics. In the United States, it's estimated that more than 1 in 10 adults are taking antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. 20% of Americans are on some sort of psychiatric medication, and doctors estimate that another 20% should be medicated. There are 50 million prescriptions per year for Xanax. Other Western countries are not far behind. What is it about our times that leaves so many people suffering from gnawing insecurities, ongoing frustrations, negative thoughts, despair, limiting self-doubts, and anxiety? Pandemic aside, why is it that in our society where more people than ever enjoy freedom and choice, it has become such a struggle to feel happy? Well, our author underwent traditional therapy for many years, and you may be familiar that the Freudian model of therapy believes that mental illness is caused by unresolved issues and events from childhood. This was not helpful to the author in the long run. She got very tired of being told to deal with her unfinished business from when she was growing up. She didn't want to only look back. She wanted to move forward, to move towards something and find hope and potential. And this is where I got to where I was reading the last excerpt about the spark. She felt there was a hidden spark inside somewhere, but she did not know how to access that spark. And her therapists, kept saying, you're not getting at the real issues, and you're avoiding reality. You're looking for an easy way out. So slowly she started to feel that her healing was not going to come from a traditional therapist. She turned to Zen Buddhism. She tried a life coach. Nothing worked. Then she came across a book by Viktor Frankel, Man's Search for Meaning. For Frankel, finding a genuine purpose to living changes your outlook on life. It can even save your life. Frankel was a gifted student of Freud and a champion of psychoanalysis during its heyday in the 1920s. Ultimately, Frankel challenged Freud's ideas, disagreeing with him on a number of issues, most importantly, what really drives humans to act and think the way they do. For Freud, the fundamental human drives are pleasure, self-preservation, and the avoidance of pain. But Frankel saw the primary human drive as a search for meaning and purpose in life. He developed his theory called logotherapy, which means therapy of meaning. One cannot set up the search for happiness as one's primary goal. Happiness is a byproduct of finding something to care about, something to feel passionate about. Happiness can never be the goal in and of itself. For Frankel, the pursuit of pleasure was superseded by the pursuit of meaning and purpose. For Michal Oshman, this desire to find purpose and meaning was what she felt was a little spark that she knew was inside of her, a spark she knew was capable of growing into something more. And then it happened. From the most unexpected place came a life-changing discovery. She discovered a powerful set of principles to better manage fear, anxiety, sadness, and despair. Jewish wisdom. It was like discovering a guide to finding joy that she had never known existed, a source of psychological wisdom that could help her when she felt stuck in life, that could show her how to find contentment, inner peace of mind, and happiness. She made this discovery around Passover time. And just to go, I know we're all familiar with Passover and its meaning, but it's not simply a holiday commemorating liberation from slavery 3,000 years ago. Passover is a holiday about discovering how we are held in bondage today by the pharaohs of our own making. And I know it's only January, but believe it or not, Passover will be here before you know it. So it's actually kind of, the timing is okay to start thinking about Passover. But Passover is a reminder that tells us, as hard as it was to get the Jewish people out of Egypt 3 millennia ago, it is even harder to get the Egypt out of yourself today. In other words, Egypt doesn't just describe a physical country. It symbolizes any place where you are not free, where you are chained to something that keeps you enslaved. As a matter of fact, the meaning of the word for the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, and the actual definition of that is narrow places, narrow boundaries, narrow straits, tight spots. So liberating ourselves from tight spots, from our own narrowness, our own narrow-mindedness, our own constrictions, our own self-limiting, irrational thoughts, our own self-imposed slavery. We must see Passover as a time to check our own internal chains, those thoughts and beliefs that keep us trapped, limited, chained. So we can ask ourselves, even though it's not yet even Tu B'Shvat, we can still ask ourselves, what Egypt, what Mitzrayim are we chained to? What Mitzrayim are we chaining ourselves to? What are we enslaved to that makes us feel anxious and stressed? Whether we realize it or not, everyone has their own Egypt. So what's your Egypt? The author Googled depression, anxiety, finding happiness, and Judaism. And she was led to a Professor Lowenthal in London who recommended that she begin taking a class in Jewish spiritual texts taught by a Hasidic rabbi. Hasidic Judaism, or Hasidut, seeks to bring spirituality, joy, and meaning to everyday life. It teaches how to replace fear and anxiety with joy and purpose. It offers deep yet down-to-earth and pragmatic teachings from Jewish texts that can be applied to everyday life. By learning the hidden lessons from the Torah, it is possible to discover the path to true joy and inner peace. So she started studying an early work of Hasidic wisdom, first published in 1796 by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, called the Tanya. It's not necessarily a reform document, but it contains wisdom that helps people find their own purpose and meaning in life and brings spirituality into everyday life. It talks about the existence of the soul. Now, I remember riding a subway in New York City and saw a little ad on a placard on the top of the train. It said, "You don't have to be Jewish to like Levy's rye bread." And I would amend that now to saying, you don't have to be a Hasidic Jew to benefit from a book like the Tanya. And just hearing the word, studying a Hasidic text might not be appealing to you as a modern liberal Jew, but I just want to say that you should keep in mind that Reform Judaism we've always been based on freedom of choice. We are not prohibited from discovering the hidden wisdom in any source, whether that's the Torah or the Talmud or any Hasidic text from the Baal Shem Tov in the 18th century. It's all there for us. The beauty of Reform is that we can pick and choose whatever we find meaningful and helpful to us. So that's why, we at first glance we might say, well, the Tanya, that's not for me. That's for Chabad, and it's not true. It's I enrolled in the Institute for Jewish Spirituality 10 years ago, which is populated mostly by Reform rabbis, and we went on 4 or 5 day retreats, and we spent the majority of our time studying Hasidic texts, and they were fascinating. So let's just keep an open mind to what the Tanya and what Hasidic wisdom may have to teach us. I think you'll find it very enlightening. Our author learned that anxiety is not an abnormal state of being, as taught by Hasidic wisdom, but an unavoidable part of the human condition. She was not a flawed human being after all. Anxiety is a part of life that everyone experiences to one degree or another. There is a constructive anxiety and a destructive anxiety. And sometimes anxiety is what we need as a motivating factor to get off our duff and do what needs to be done. So sometimes that's how anxiety can be positive. It forces us to accomplish what we need to, and so that's a kind of a constructive anxiety.
Rabbi, we have a question. How do you spell the name of the Hasidic text?
Tanya, Tanya. Okay?
All right, thank you.
All right. The key is not to let your negative thoughts control you or extinguish that spark which resides within you. There is no growth without internal and external tension, without genuine self-reflection, which can be painful. So I'd like to read you another excerpt. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Self-reflection is the key to growth. So too is taking action, even if it is just one tiny step forward. So I would like to just ask you a series of questions about what you would do if you weren't afraid. What experiences and memories from your past have you been holding on to that you could slowly let go of? How could you slowly let go of them? What is the cause of your anxiety? What are the things that you're afraid of? So often we think that we're abnormal in some way, from the things that have happened to us, from the things that have been done to us, and we think that we're flawed human beings, damaged goods. We have some kind of baggage from the past. And the worst of it is, we think we're the only ones who have it, that everyone else is normal and happy and leads a blissful life. And not true. Everyone has issues. Everyone deals with things that have happened in their past that have damaged their own psyche. So the first step is to realize we are not alone in our feelings of inadequacy, which leads to anxiety and stress. All right. So let's keep that in mind, that we are all bounded by the Mitzrayim, the Egypts in our life, and that we have to break free. As a child, the author spent time with her father on Sunday mornings. One such morning, he got an emergency call to go into the morgue, and he had no choice but to take his daughter with him. This was when the author saw her first dead body. Her father had asked her to stay in the waiting room upstairs, but she got bored and wandered down to the basement. Horrified as she was by the sight of the body, she remembered thinking, where are all that dead man's feelings now? His love for his family, his entire life. Do they just disappear? Are they just gone? She couldn't believe that there wasn't something else, something that lived on. Her therapist asked if she was thinking of that man's life as a defense mechanism to avoid anger towards her father. Let me read to you. This is a typical exchange I had with my 4 therapists when I tried as an adult to live a fulfilled, joyful life. Not everybody's childhood was filled with morgues and autopsies like mine was. But then again, everyone has skeletons in their closets and their own painful memories. In my case, I found that with every memory I recalled, my therapists became more and more interested in the trauma I had been exposed to and the relationship I had with my parents. But they were less interested in my spiritual and emotional development, my internal need for growth. My therapists were confident that they understood the root of my anxiety. After all, wasn't I a textbook case? They always wanted to hear more about my father. His job as a forensic pathologist fascinated them because it involved examining rape victims, babies, and children who had been abused, and all manner of other horrors that humans do to each other. When I wanted to move on from my childhood memories and talk about the present, my therapist seemed almost disappointed. They'd say I was avoiding the real issues. They'd conclude that my parents were the main reason for my difficulties and that I should confront them about the unfinished business between us. I remember my mother always she was afraid of death because her parents convinced her when she was young that death is a form of contamination. And she lived with that her whole life. So there was an example of something, how she was raised by her parents, affected her. But in this case, the author just continually was brought back to those childhood memories when she wanted to move on. Ultimately, Western models of psychotherapy based on Freudian theory didn't work for the author because they dismissed the role of the soul and the role that the soul plays in human experience. Now, I want to share with you what I think is, we always wonder what is the nature of the soul. And we're going to talk a little next week about a branch of psychology that allows for the spiritual to be a part of it. It's called soul psychology because basically psychology is a science, and 98% of psychology avoids dealing with spiritual issues. But I think one of the main points of this class is that you can deal with psychological problems from a spiritual perspective. And I think that's a lot of what religion is all about and has to share with us and to help us. But I particularly want to give you a sense that the soul is real, the soul exists, there is something inside of us, this little spark, and I think it's called the soul. Let me share with you what is by far the best description of what the soul is, and it's by Rabbi Harold Kushner, author of When Bad Things Happen to Good People, who's written over a dozen books in the last 40 years. And I have yet, this book, Who Needs God, was written in 1989, and I have yet to find a better description of the soul. He writes, I have a body, but my body is only part of who I am, and not necessarily the most important part. My body can change. I can gain or lose weight, change my hairstyle or color, even lose a limb, and I will still be the same person. The real me is found in that part of me which is not physical. My values, my memories, my habits, my personality, my sense of humor. As long as they remain unchanged, I will still be me. Don't we say of a person who looks the same but has begun to behave differently, she's just not herself these days? And of the person who has made himself over physically, but continues to behave the way he always did, we sigh and say, same old Fred. And if you're into sports and saw the display that Antonio Brown put on yesterday, unfortunately, we would have to say same old Antonio, even though he was wearing a different uniform. Some people call that non-physical part of a person's spirit or personality. I am comfortable using the traditional religious word soul to refer to that energy, that combination of propensities, values, and memories that every one of us has, as personal and unique as our fingerprints, as long as we live. When I die, my body will be buried and gradually decay and return to the earth. But what will happen to my soul? I believe that because it is not physical, a soul cannot die. I can't imagine what happens to it because my mind can only think in three-dimensional terms and can't conjure with the notion of where non-physical entities go when they no longer have bodies to incarnate them. It is like asking where the light goes when you turn off the switch, or where ideas are stored before anyone thinks of them, or what happens to stories that nobody tells anymore. There may be answers to those questions, but my mind cannot conceive of them. In physics, there is the law of conservation of matter and energy, which Einstein taught us are different forms of the same reality. Nothing disappears, It is transformed from one form to another. The dead bird we bury becomes part of the soil that makes the grass grow. When we step on the brakes to slow down the car, the energy is transformed into heat that is sent out into the world. Why should there not be a law of conservation of spiritual energy? So that's when we die, our bodies are nothing more than the perishable shell that houses our true essence, which is our soul. And that everyone has that soul, that spark that's inside of them that really is the person that we are. And this is a class about how to access that aspect of us, to listen to what our soul is trying to tell us. All right, so let me get back to notes here. In Genesis 2:7, it says, God formed man from the dust of the earth, and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. Then man became a living being. We all know that story. According to this verse, the human soul is the breath of God. The Hebrew word for soul, Neshamah, is related to the Hebrew word for breath. So the concept of Neshamah is that being alive and having a soul is the same thing. Each of us contains a flame within us, the flame of God, a soul. And that flame needs to be nurtured, cared for, and grown. The hidden spark, our soul, is capable of feeling joy and finding true purpose in life. But where is this spark located? We know the soul exists, yet we don't know how to locate it, don't know much about it, and we are often not sure how to care for it, how to look after it. We often feel the existence of our soul most strongly in times of difficulty. That's because when the soul isn't fulfilled, it sends us signals, calling for our attention, often through feelings of fear, sadness, or anxiety. And this is part of what separates us from the animals. In terms of physiology, we have thumbs so we can build things, we can reason, and in terms of morality, we have a conscience, we can make moral decisions, but we have a soul, we have a spirit that impels us to find meaning out of our life. We don't just live by instinct like the animals. So when we feel things aren't going right, when we feel sadness or anxiety, that's our soul talking to us. It's telling us that we feel something isn't quite right. There is the Jewish mystical concept of klipa, which means kind of covering or shell, a metaphysical barrier that obscures the soul, sort of like a shell that conceals the treasure within. The klipa is associated with mundane things like money, work, success, popularity, and beauty. If we focus too much on these unspiritual things, our happiness comes to depend on them. And so we experience fear, the fear of losing all these things. But if we can see past the klipa, past the distractions of the physical world, we might be able to find the divine energy within the shell, the divine soul within the body, that very special divine flame. The soul is oblivious to wealth, beauty, and popularity. So too is it immune to the fear of failure, pain, or rejection. The soul is eternal, spiritual. It seeks meaningful things like transcendence, joy, growth, and fulfillment. I want to read you another excerpt. For me, the concepts of Neshamah and klipa underscore the way Jewish wisdom approaches the world. The physical world is an enabler, a material layer that covers the real purpose of life. I found this idea revolutionary. It made everything less frightening. And when I realized that my purpose was to somehow release and grow that flame within me, I saw what an important and deeply personal job we all have to do. We must get past that shell of fear and grow the flame inside. Discovering that there was a powerful essence inside me when it felt like fear was taking over my life was a game changer for me. For years I had been disconnected from myself. I was focused on revisiting childhood trauma, letting others tell me what the problem was, living with the identity I had been labeled with, feeding my ego rather than my soul. And we're going to come back to this idea a lot, that feeding the ego rather than the soul, letting our ego dictate our actions and our thoughts and behaviors as opposed to paying attention to the soul. That's a very important aspect. When Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden and ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he tried to hide from God, God came after him and said, Ayeka, where are you? God didn't ask Adam, what is this that you've done? Or what's wrong with you? God didn't blame or accuse Adam. The idea of Ayeka, of saying, where are you? Moving away from the blame game and looking inward at yourself is therapeutic and beneficial. Making mistakes is built into the human condition. None of us was designed with the idea that we could possibly be perfect. This is one of the fundamental concepts of Jewish wisdom. Life isn't about doing everything right. It's about the internal struggle and hopefully the lessons we learn for self-improvement. We are exactly the opposite of perfect. We are flawed and imperfect, ready to learn and improve ourselves and the world around us. You've all heard of tikkun olam, perfecting the world. There's also such a thing as tikkun midot, which is the perfection of individual attributes. And that's where we work on ourselves to be better people. Asking where are you right now is more important than trying to solve the problems of childhood through traditional therapy. It's not a question about what you've done or what's been done to you, but rather who you are and where you are on your personal growth journey. All too often, we focus on the bad things that have happened to us. We allow negative experiences to define us. And when we search for answers or healing, we tend to look backward to those events. That is not a productive or healthy approach to living. But if we ask ourselves not what has gone wrong in the past, but where we are today, and focus on who we are now, we give the power back to ourselves. It's not about what we've done, but who we have the potential to be. It's about what we can do to make things go right. Jewish wisdom tells us that our Neshamah is our true essence, and searching for it, growing it, finding it beneath the shell is the only thing that will allow us to control our fears and help us to become who we were meant to be. There's the story of Reb Zuzia, who passed away and went to heaven. And when he went to heaven, he was asked not, why were you not more like Moses? He was asked, why were you not more like Zuzia? Why were you not more like yourself? It was Einstein who said, if you change nothing, nothing will change. So we have to look at what is it that we can change about ourselves that will lead to growth and fulfillment. And I had shared some of these questions with you before about the experiences and memories from your past that you've been holding on to that you could slowly let go of, that have been the cause of anxiety. Viktor Frankel, in Man's Search for Meaning, as we mentioned earlier in the class, he went through the concentration camps. There he found great despair in many of the inmates who felt that there was no hope left in life. And he asked someone who was despairing what his issues were, and he said, I no longer have anything to expect from life. And Frankel responded by saying, isn't it conceivable that life expects something from you? That life expects something from you. Also, a Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, was visited by one of his disciples who was having trouble in business, and he was losing money, and he didn't know how he was going to survive. And he kept complaining about his financial situation and what he needed. And Rabbi Zalman responded saying, I'm hearing a lot about what you need, but have you ever considered what you are needed for? The way to fix yourself is not to get what you need, but to give what you are needed for. Each of us has a unique soul, but we also have a unique purpose. It is our job and mission to find out what that unique purpose is. While modern culture asks, how can I be fulfilled? Jewish wisdom asks, what am I here to do? How am I here to help? My rabbi, who I grew up with, Herbert Morris, passed away years ago, and his daughter wrote a book about his life. And in the very first page, she talks about when he would wake up every morning, he would look himself in the mirror, and he called himself by his Hebrew name. He said, Chaim, so what are you going to do today to be a blessing to somebody? And that's the whole idea about we find meaning in life, not from getting what we need, but how we can help someone else who is in need. And that's always stuck with me. So, Chaim, what are you going to do today to be a blessing to somebody? Those who don't realize that the key to finding fulfillment lies in giving to others experience what Frankel calls the existential vacuum, which is an internal void that comes about when you cannot clarify what is truly meaningful to you. This void of meaninglessness causes sadness, a lack of purpose, and most of all, anxiety. The feeling that one's life is meaningless often results in one seeking immediate gratification or satisfaction, something that will fill up the emptiness inside. Anything to avoid that terrible feeling of emptiness. One of the most important lessons from Jewish wisdom is that feeding the ego is the quickest way to starve the soul. And I want you to remember that line. Feeding the ego is the quickest way to starve the soul. That's so important. When we do things because they seem impressive or make us look successful, we are missing a chance to pursue our true purpose. Jewish wisdom encourages us to look at our emptiness through a totally different lens and see that what we are feeling is not emptiness after all. It is actually a void that is being filled with the wrong things. And there's a concept, one of the concepts that's talked about in the book is the concept of Bittul, which it means self-nullification or nothingness. The practice of Bittul is an attempt to empty yourself of yourself, to make space for the divine, to make space for others. Now, God did the same thing through what is called tzimtzum, the mystical version of creation is that in the beginning, there was nothing but God. God covered the entire universe, all space. In order to make room for the world, God had to contract himself in order to make space for the process of creation. So God essentially engaged in the process of Bittul, sort of a nullification or diminution of the self. And that's what we're talking about here. Freeing yourself from yourself. And that's the whole idea of the ego, is that trying to start realizing that it's not all about us, that we are not the be-all and end-all of existence. As Lawrence Kushner, who's probably the best Hasidic teacher in Reform Judaism, he's a Reform rabbi who really brought Hasidic wisdom into popularity over the last 30, 40 years. But he wrote a book called I'm God, You're Not. And that's the whole message of the first commandment. I'm the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It's not even a commandment, it's a statement. What's it saying? It's saying that there's a God out there and it's not us. We're not God. It's not all about us. I remember in Youngstown 30 years ago, someone in the community, she had a 70th birthday party, and she handed out T-shirts that said, "It's all about me." And it was meant tongue in cheek, because the party was in her honor. But I started to realize the message of Judaism is exactly the opposite. What does Judaism try to teach us? If we could wear a T-shirt that conveyed the essence of Judaism, what would it say? It would say, "It's not all about me." And therein lies the secret of finding joy and purpose, to realize that it's not all about us, that the joy comes in giving. It requires a combination of modesty, humility, and selflessness. Today, in a world that talks so much about self-care, how can emptying yourself instead of filling yourself up help you find fulfillment? So we're gonna stop there, and I'll see if anyone has any questions or comments about everything we've covered today, and we'll take it up again next week. Any thoughts or reactions from anyone? Anything you'd like to share uh, about your own personal struggles with anxiety or issues? I know we haven't left a whole lot of time, but if there's a lot of response, we can carry it over into the session. Anyone? Any thoughts about today? Was it helpful, or was it what you expected? Was it not what you expected? Like I said, I'm not a professionally trained therapist, and I don't pass myself off as that. But I do think Judaism has a lot to say about how we can approach anxiety from a spiritual perspective. Bert.
Yes, we're talking about forgiving and moving on, but yet there is a point where you have to stand your ground, and that's what's expected as well. How do you determine what a good person should do and a bad person would end up doing? I mean, just there's a conflict there between the two. And what does Judaism tell us?
All right. I'm trying to understand your question. Is that you say there's a point where you have to stand your ground. Can you give me an example?
Well, you don't have to be a doormat and take everything. There's a point that you can't accept the way things are, and you got to engage, and maybe you got to fight a little bit to accomplish what the right thing is.
I would say, and I don't know if Judaism says this, but this is more of just a practical answer, is that you need to surround yourself with things and with people that don't bring you down and that don't cause you to feel negatively about yourself. That you don't need to associate with people at all who put you in a state of mind that is not constructive or positive. And you have the ability to make those choices, and you have the right to make those choices, and you don't have to be spending time with anything or anyone who makes you feel bad about yourself. That, I think, that's the whole purpose of religion, is to help you feel good about you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. We'll take. It's 1:30, and if you have to leave, we understand. And I have to actually go myself. We'll take one more comment. And
Randy was raising her hand. Randy, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I will. And this is just a comment and two takeaways. It's not all about me. I've known that. And what I really loved, every morning now, I'm going to wake up and say, how can I be a blessing today? So thank you for those two takeaways.
Oh, you're so welcome. That really has a big influence on me too. Is that whole idea of asking how we can be a blessing. So I apologize if I left enough time for comments. Do we have any? Do we have one more? Anyone?
Looks like no. Just from myself, that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. That was great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll have more next Monday at 12:30. And I wish everyone again a happy New Year and a good week.
Yes, I saw some people trickling in right around 1. So no worries. We're going to upload this online, so you'll be able to watch the whole thing from start. And if you guys want to invite any of your friends, feel free to share the link with them as well.
Barbara
So
Brenner.
don't miss the first one. All righty. Thanks, guys.
Good day.